Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle, from tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/081, and you can email me at pedalshift@pedalshift.net. And check the show out also on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Big hello to everybody out there for the 81st edition of the Pedalshift Project. I'm Tim Mooney, and I am back to talk a little bit about bikepacking on this episode, some follow-up from past episodes, the journal, little short version of the journal to reveal what my June tour is going to be. Let's get cracking. First up on the show, we've got some follow-up, and I've got some more sad news. I swear, Big Sur is just getting hammered every time I look. In fact, I thought that the story that I'm about to tell was actually just a retelling of an older version of the story that took out the bridge. No, actually, there's been another mudslide on California Highway 1 near Big Sur. In fact, south of Esalen, if you know the rather famous place. If you watch Mad Men, it was in the last episode. But anyways, the mudslide just buried the road. 30 or 40 feet of mud and rock are now on top of the road. Take a look. I've got a link in the show notes to the CNN article on it, but I mean, it was all over the place over the last couple of days. Take a look at it. It's going to take a little while to dig out. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it certainly throws another bit of a problem for anybody who's considering doing the Pacific route. Now, of course, you had the problem with the bridge to begin with, but who knows what's going to end up happening, how long this will take. There's a finite amount of resources to be able to dig out the road and rebuild a bridge all at once. It's going to happen. It's going to have to happen. But man, the Pacific route's taking a hammering in one very specific spot near Big Sur. So maybe it's not a good year for Big Sur, but if your plans still include it, I'd love to hear what you're doing to deal with that. A lot of people are doing 101. I talked about this on a past show, so go check out that past show where I talk about it. Another bit of follow-up, I have an email from Thomas, who is a Washington State Park Ranger who's a listener. Hi, Thomas. Thanks for writing in. And he had some follow-up on plugging things in while in state parks like his. He writes, thanks for tips for securing your electronics. I've been an LE park ranger for many years, and sadly, it's those crimes of opportunity that occur most often. For hiker-bikers leaving items charging in restrooms or outlets, I'm always happy to provide my business card to them. Placing a card with a badge on it on top of an unattended charging device is somewhat of a deterrent. I imagine most officers would oblige this request, and you never know when you'd need to call us. I think that's a great idea, Thomas. Thank you for offering that type of a thing to folks staying in your park. Hope to get a chance, by the way, to swing by where you're at in Washington State. I think you said Cape Disappointment. That's an awesome place, so I really want to go check that out. But yeah, that's a good idea. See if the park rangers would be willing to give a card or some other way of saying, hey, don't touch this kind of a thing. I remember in California, this would have been one of my many stays in the Avenue of the Giants. The name of the specific park is eluding me at the moment. Very, very good planning, Tim. Burlington Campground. There we go. The Burlington Campground, I asked if they would, because they had outlets, of course, in the check-in station, asked if they'd be okay charging a battery or something. And they said no, just because from a liability perspective, they explained they didn't want to take on people's phones and whatnot. That makes some sense, but it's nice to see that there are rangers that will give you at least an option for protecting your stuff. So Thomas, thanks for writing in and helping us out with the follow-up to last episode about keeping things charged. Next up is the journal, and journal is where we talk about your tours and my tours. And this edition of the show, I'm going to be revealing what I'm going to be doing. I talked about last episode that there was a possibility of me doing the West Coast, possibility of me doing the Eastern Express. Well, as it turns out, I've decided that I'm going to be riding a chunk of the Eastern Express, largely because I wanted to ride something new. I feel like that I've been doing a lot of repeats recently, and I'd like to see some new places. So what I am going to do and what I plan to do is I'm going to be taking the train to Connelsville, Pennsylvania. And that is one of my favorite trail towns on the Gap. And it's great because there's camping right behind a grocery store. So what that allows me to do is I can get my food and get basically geared up for anything that I would need from a store that day or that next morning, more to the point. So I don't have to bring a lot of stuff. I can just kind of get it there. It's a nice, well-stocked major chain grocery store, so it works out really well. From there, it's a short ride on the Gap, and then you can get off of that and get on the this Iron Steel Trail, I believe, the Montour Trail, and then the Panhandle Trail, all the way out to Steubenville, Ohio. And that is where I'm going to be making a decision, because I think that I might consider going further than Steubenville. That's going to be the point where I'm going to decide whether to turn around and either do a nice leisurely rest of the week coming back home to DC, taking all of those aforementioned trails and then the Gap and then the C&O back to DC. Or what I might do is I may just go as far west as I've got time to do and then do a one-way rental car to get myself home. Lots of different options. I think I'm just going to kind of feel what the weather's given me, what I feel like doing. I certainly know those other trails better, but I really would like to get into this Eastern Express and maybe test out how that is in that really critical space around Ohio. I know that there have been some people that have actually already written in and have been helpful in making some adjustments to that, because I think that there were some things that needed to be changed a little bit. And Frank Moritz, who we talked with on episode 79 of the show, go check that out, has been making some changes. And I hope to be able to give my thoughts as well on the transition, especially around the Steubenville area. That seems to be the area where things are a little bit, I don't want to say dicey, but at least there's question marks in that. So I'm going to throw in my 2 cents on that. I'm probably going to do some kind of tour journal. I haven't decided if I'm going to do a full-fledged version of it yet. If you subscribe to the newsletter, you'll be getting something extra. I may do some kind of live thing or something additional during that week. That's going to be the off week for the show. We will be back next week with the show. Normally I don't do four weeks in a row, but because of the tour, it'll be a lot easier for me to do a podcast previewing the tour and then taking the off week while I'm on tour. So anyways, that's what's happening. I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to try something new. And that was the reason I dinged the West Coast a little bit, because I'd already done it once. The other thing was travel, for whatever reason, in June is really expensive to get to the Northwest, both Portland and Seattle. So I know that I'll get back there again at some other point, and I do think that this Eastern Express is really calling me. So we'll see how this all goes. I'm excited to talk more about it on the show. Next up on the show is the interview, and I am really pleased to be introducing you to Robert Knapp, who is a bike packer and a bikepacking racer, more to the point. Robert's from the self-described boonies of Virginia, and he got into bikepacking through the Allegheny Mountains Loop and its extreme sister ride, which is just longer and more extreme. Since then, he's tackled bikepacking racing head on, and he's also taken Boy Scouts out on much more sedate versions of his rides. This discussion was really great, and I learned a lot about bikepacking and bikepacking racing, and I think that Robert's a kick-ass dude who does some kick-ass things. Hi, Rob. Welcome to Pedalshift.
Hi, Tim. I appreciate the interest in interviewing me.
I'm so thrilled to have you on the show. You wrote to me, I feel like it was a little over a month ago, and you sent me a journal of this incredibly badass race that you got involved in and kind of offered up some insight on bikepacking, which I have very little exposure to. So I thought I'd take you up on a chat on it. So why don't you let everybody know kind of who you are and what your background is in bikepacking?
My name's Rob Knapp. I'm 50 years old. When I did the race Tim's referring to, I was 49. I started cycling, I guess, about 3 years ago in an effort to try to lose weight, which I've lost 54 pounds. Still have a ways to go. But I just dove into the cycling, started listening to podcasts and trying to learn more and more. And one day I was on the internet and I discovered the Allegheny Mountains Loop, which are two different races that take place in they start in Virginia at the campus of Virginia Tech, and they go into West Virginia. One is 400 miles long, the other is 520 miles. And these races just really, I just kept thinking about them. I was looking at the routes almost every day, looking at Google Earth, studying the route, planning, and I worked on learning about bikepacking because I've never really have experienced bikepacking, but I am a scoutmaster with the Boy Scouts, and as a youth was a Boy Scout, so I did know about backpacking, and there's some similarities there as far as gear and things. So, just very good adventures.
What I find fascinating, and anybody, I'll repost this, and I think you've got a link to all of this as well. Am I not mistaken, Rob?
Yes, the Allegheny Mountains Loop and the Allegheny Mountains Loop Extreme. They probably the best place to find them is either Facebook or they actually have a website on Blogspot.
This is a not fooling around kind of, bicycling way more than 12, 14 hours in a day, getting a couple hours of a sleep, and then getting up and doing it again for 4 or 5 days in a row kind of race. This is like those crazy endurance races that we've talked about on the show before, but this is the added benefit of also being on some fairly technical single track and some other really beautiful scenic parts of Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. Is that probably the best way to describe these two?
Yes, exactly.
So you're brand new to all this, but for some reason this incredibly strenuous, difficult ride calls to you. What was sort of your process to do the research and to overall get ready for it? And what kind of insight did that give you on bikepacking in general?
Well, I went to some different resources that are available online. One is bikepacking.com, which is a great resource. Lots of information on gear, bikes that are needed, and also different routes, because there's routes actually listed all over the world for bikepacking on that website. Another resource is bikepacking.net. That's very useful. Some gear that you need. You don't just do this on your normal road bike now.
Hell no.
No. Although the first time I did the Allegheny Mountains Loop, which is a 400-mile race, I did it on a touring bike. I have a Rivendale, and I did it on smooth tires, no tread on them.
Wow.
That are 33 1/3 millimeters. So kind of narrow tires.
And you did this, all that single track you were able to do on that kind of a bike, huh?
Yes, but I live in an area with a lot of gravel roads, and I ride that bike on uneven surfaces all the time. So I felt confident that I could complete the route on that bike.
Gotcha.
In hindsight, it probably wasn't the best bike, and I did replace it for bikepacking specifically with another bike, more of a gravel style bike. But I actually did complete the race on it. That was the spring of last year, and 11 people started the race. 3 ended up finishing, and I was one of those 3. Wow,
that's amazing. And as a first timer, to be able to complete it when 8 other people didn't, that's kind of remarkable. I'm giving you a pat on the back if you didn't give it to yourself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, my wife said that she knew I would finish it, because even if I died, my ghost would be dragging the bike along.
I know. I'm kind of the same way. I get it. What's sort of your takeaway then, for like, let me ask this in a way that's sort of the most helpful. Did these bikepacking websites where you got the information from, do you feel like that they helped you build the gear set that you needed to be able to complete this race and to enjoy yourself out there? Or are there a few things that you've learned that maybe you would supplement based on your experience now?
Yeah, they did help with the gear. Typically, bikepackers will use frame bags and a roll that goes on the handlebars. And typically a bag that comes off the back of the seat post. Now, the first time I did the race, I had just regular panniers on the back and a handlebar bag. And I did have a small frame bag that I used as well. And I overpacked, which that's a hard thing just reading about to learn. One thing I do with my Boy Scouts when we go on a bikepacking trip, I recommend when they get home, unpack your gear. Anything you didn't use, maybe don't bring it next time.
That's great advice.
Yeah, after that first experience with the bikepacking, that's what I did. And the story that you were referring to that I sent you, I streamlined my gear and had a much more successful experience. I actually got the second fastest time on the route ever. So, and that was a 520-mile race.
The story that you told, I mean, it just sounded like it was a really grueling ride in parts, and it also seemed that what was interesting was it sounds like you knew the area pretty well. I don't know if you grew up in the area, but I got the impression that you knew the area fairly well. But yet at night you still missed some turns, and that ended up being a bit of a hassle for you as you're trying to make this race happen. What were some of the challenges that you found dealing with that route?
Well, aside from the elevation gain, which is 50,000 feet approximately on that 520-mile route, definitely the navigation is crucial. So what most bikepackers will do is they'll run a GPS up on their handlebars to plot your route, and this is really no different probably than someone touring in a unfamiliar area. You also will bring maps to back up and try and have a cue sheet with turns, but that's hard to keep up with it, or at least for me it is. The GPS I find is much easier. But yeah, at the beginning of the race, I was very familiar with that area, been out there many times, and just the fact that I started at 3:30 in the morning, just things didn't look as familiar as they did during the day, and I did miss turns. It was kind of amusing and taught me a lesson.
Yeah. The other fun part that I remember from the story was going to that one market where you ran into the same lady both coming and going, and how she wasn't exactly thrilled about your presence so early in the morning. You want to tell that story?
Oh, yeah. So at the 80-mile mark approximately, there's a little market. This is a very rural area, not many places to resupply, which of course when you're bikepacking, just like backpacking, the more weight you have, the harder it is. So you want to try and strategically place where you will resupply with food. And the race that is in the write-up of the story that I wrote is they call it a lollipop. So you go out and back the same route. So she just we got to talking on the way out, and I told her what I was doing, and she seemed interested, maybe a little, but it was just one of those funny little things that happens when you're out, in the middle of nowhere.
I liked how you had to describe to people, not just her, but on multiple occasions, that you needed to get a beer for the calories, and how that kind of got a blank stare back from a lot of people. I think that you kind of have to be in that caloric deficit to be able to understand that, I think.
Yeah, now, actually, I learned that from a podcast that I listened to when I first started cycling, and they were talking about doing century rides and how a beer, it almost gives you instant calories. So if you can buy a beer right then and drink it down, it can really benefit you. And I had misunderstood, which there were several stores, two different stores with two different ladies that I was talking to. So I was thinking about a different store when you were asking me that question, Tim.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, this is the one where you saw her on the way out, and you were, I think it was early in the morning, and then you also saw her on the way back, and you were probably pretty ragged looking at that point, and just how she saw you both ways.
On the way out, I was wanting to buy a beer actually for later. It was the morning of my second day into the trip, and I guess I arrived at the store around 6 o'clock in the morning. Well, in West Virginia, they do not sell alcohol before 7. And she told me I had to wait. Of course, I wasn't really wanting to have to wait, but I decided that I would anyway, just because I wanted to have those calories. So, it was also extremely cold that morning. It was late in October. And I asked her if I could bring my bike into the store, and she wasn't too thrilled about that. But I actually talked her into it. I told her I'd be very careful with it and all that. And she did allow me to carry the bike into the store, which was nice to have it there so I could get out of the weather.
Yeah, with a race like this, it wasn't like that there were, hundreds of people coming through. So, with just a handful of you, it's not like she had the heads up. And plus, it sounds like that you were the first or one of the first that would have come through there. So that's kind of a funny story. And also, talk about something that they probably don't see every day there, even though there's obviously a route for bike packing nearby. They're probably not seeing people who are racing just about every day.
Right, that's true. Now, it is a American Cycling Association route, but the races are actually a modification of that route to encompass as much gravel and off-road and single track as possible.
Gotcha. So, you come in second place, it sounds like, or you had the second fastest time, you were saying, and all of that. And the racing element seems to have been the thing that got you into bike packing. But it sounds like also that you're into it generally now, too. How would you approach a bike packing trip, whether it's with the Scouts or on your own, differently when you're not racing?
Not racing, I would carry more food. Might bring a small alcohol stove, maybe even one of the little propane stoves with a butane. The food I would most likely bring, or that I bring when I'm not racing, is just freeze-dried meals. And as opposed to when you are racing, you're just filling up with as many calories as you can, candy bars, just things you can grab on the go and fill your bags up as quick as you can to get more miles behind you. So
sounds like it's frame bag, saddle bag, and then handlebar bag is sort of the typical setup. Is that what you end up using? And
yes.
Does that feel like a good combo for somebody who's just starting to get into it too?
Yes, I would definitely recommend that. And bike packing is really coming into its own. There's more and more companies that are making gear for it and specific bags. The brand that I have is Revelate Designs. I've been very pleased with those bags. I have a frame bag that I use more regularly. I use it even when I'm not bike packing, and I've done century plus rides with that bag in rain the entire time, and all my gear inside just stays dry. But even Ortlieb is getting into bike packing gear now.
Yeah, I just saw their frame bag that looks pretty good and is getting pretty good reviews, but I know Revelate's the one that gets the most sort of attention.
Yes, exactly. And there's another brand that I'm going to look into called J-Pack.
Gotcha. And is that also a frame bag, or do they do all of the bags as well?
They do all the bags as well.
Gotcha. Is there any recommendations that you have for folks who are kind of just dipping the big toe in? Do you feel like that you could kind of play around with less expensive frame bags to start, or do you think that it's just worth jumping in with both feet? Well,
for sure you could start with less expensive frame bags. A buddy of mine, he bought one of the saddle bags that comes off the seat post on eBay, and it seems like a very good bag, and I think he spent $30-40 on it, where some of these others are up at $100 or a little bit over that. I typically, my experience with gear, I'd rather pay a little bit more and have something that's going to last me. Not to knock these other bags, but just that's been my experience with gear in general.
Generally my feeling as well, and once I'm able to identify the stuff that, you know, maybe you can spend a little bit less money on, then I can kind of go that direction. But for important things like gear bags and things that are keeping things dry, often spending the extra money is worth it, I find as well. Oh, what's the best recommendation you would have generally for a bike? Are you into suspension bikes or rigid frames? What's sort of the best bet for bike packing?
So most people will use a rigid frame just because of simplicity with regards to weight for one thing, and then also maintenance. These bikes are really getting knocked around. You're typically off-road, going through mud, ditches, riding over roots, and it's a lot of abuse for the bike. And there's two ways of thinking on this. Most bike packers will use something along the lines of a 29 mountain bike, a 29er. There are others that are starting to come around with a cyclocross style bike, or these new gravel bikes that are coming of age. And that's actually what I used on this 500-mile race, which was my second race. And then now I've done a third race, the Allegheny Mountains Loop, and I was very successful on that one. That was this spring. And my bike just performed flawlessly.
For a cyclocross bike, is that going to be a 700C wheel, or what's the size on that?
Yes, 700C wheel. And I'm running 40-millimeter tires on it.
Gotcha. So you're wider than that first bike, it sounds like, is the way to go, right?
Yes, exactly, wider than that first bike. One thing I would recommend for sure is disc brakes. The bike that I used the first time had just standard rim brakes, and the second day of that race, it was rain all day long, and so much grit built up on the brake pads that I literally, through one 20-mile section, I burned through an entire front brake pad set.
Amazing.
So definitely I would recommend disc brakes for sure.
Have you run into any problems with the disc brakes? Because, I mean, the one downside to a disc brake is that if, you know, your caliper gets bent or anything like that, you're sort of hosed. How's that been for you?
I have not had a single problem with disc brakes. And as you read from my story on the race that I did, I had a very violent crash about 4:30 in the morning. And maybe I was lucky and the brakes just didn't get tweaked or anything, but I swear by disc brakes now.
One of these days, I feel like my next bike is probably going to end up being disc brakes. I've always had, standard rim brakes just because that's what's come standard with a lot of my bikes. And but if I do get more into the bike packing kind of scenarios, I think it's going to be a disc brake. And it sort of brings back my memories because I got started back when I lived in Oregon. I did some single track. And so this is all very appealing to me because it kind of merges the old style of how I used to ride with this newfangled style, for me at least, of bike touring. So I'm kind of attracted to it all. Why do you think bike packing grabbed you versus kind of the traditional pannier and road touring? Was it the bike packing background you had? I'm sorry, backpacking.
Yeah, I know. It gets confusing, bikepacking, backpacking. I don't know. I think just the challenge of it, the distance, and all that. I really have always embraced a challenge, and I've always excelled at endurance events. Even when I was like in high school, I ran track and cross country, and it was always the distance events that I was better at. And something about just going out literally in the middle of nowhere. This course goes close to the Green Bank Telescope up in West Virginia, And for listeners that aren't familiar with that, there's a 100-mile radio silence that the government has established around there, where there are no cell phone towers, pretty much nothing. You are extremely remote. And on the East Coast, it's hard to find anything like that.
Yeah, that's about it. I think that's the only place where you've got that kind of radio silence that I know of, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe up in Maine someplace, up by Mount Katahdin, the end of the AT or something like that. But yeah. So what's next? What's next for you, Rob? Are you looking at maybe some of the more famous routes? The Continental Divide, anything like that? What's sort of on your horizon?
So after my success on the most recent Allegheny Mountains Loop, which is the 400-mile race that took place this spring, I ended up winning the race, and I actually set the course record. I got my wife convinced got her on board with me to do the Tour Divide in 2018.
Nice.
And that starts in Banff, British Columbia, and goes all the way to the Mexican border. You go through Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, and New Mexico. It's 2,800 miles long, and I'm really looking forward to that.
Oh, I think that ride is an absolute jewel. You may remember from listeners in the past, my buddy Mysterious James took a bit of a tumble on that, but I know he's intending to go back and ride that. But that seems to be the sort of quintessential bikepacking route in North America. So I'm glad to hear that you're going to be tackling that and doing that as part of the race too, it sounds like.
That is my plan right now.
That's fantastic. What do you do are you going to do anything different to train for that? The Allegheny routes, what's sort of your prep for that?
Well, what I'm planning for the Tour Divide next year, my plan is this fall to race the Allegheny Mountains Loop Extreme again, which is the 500-miler. And I'm contemplating adding the Allegheny Mountains Loop when I finish. So it'd be 900 miles worth of bikepacking.
No big deal, just 900 miles.
So, yeah.
And what was that, 50,000 feet of elevation gain that you said?
Yeah, that's for the 500-miler. The 400-miler is 40,000 approximately, so we're talking about 90,000 feet of elevation.
That is
gain.
Amazing.
So I'm planning on doing that. Another training thing I want to do is called the Cross Florida ITT, and essentially you ride from one coast of Florida to the other, and you have the option of either doing it one way or going back as well, and that's another race. I think that one would be beneficial just for the fact that it's flat and you're always pedaling. One thing with elevation gain, you have to go up, but you also get a rest going down. Florida is a different beast.
Yes.
I did a race out there, a road race called the 24 Hours of Sebring, and it was totally flat. And I ended up with 413 miles in 24 hours, but it was all on the road, flat, but you never got a break from pedaling.
Yeah, that's what I've been telling people on the C&O. They're all excited that there's no hills. I said, yeah, but there's no hills. So, yeah, is that something you do in the winter? That sounds like it would be a good conditioning ride to keep you up in bike shape through the winter before tackling the divide, I guess, later in the spring or the summer.
Yes, exactly. So we have the Florida races are typically in the winter, usually around January or February. And also we have the New River Trail close to where I live, and I'll go out and do a century on that, or really, I think it's usually about 118 miles to do the whole thing, and I'll do that like on a Saturday for training for these events. Now, for the Tour Divide, you asked specifically on that. Something else I'm thinking about is putting water, just bags of water into my bike and into the bags, and carrying extra weight as I'm just doing my normal rides. Typically I ride about 15 to 20 miles every day. and just building up with that extra weight.
Yeah, that seems like a good idea because, I mean, you have to carry quite a bit of water just on that. I know that there's long sections where you've got very little in the way of any kind of, well, certainly no supplies or any contact. But yeah, what little I know about that Tour Divide, that's a real deal one. Yeah,
definitely. Water is a key to bikepacking in general. I always carry a Sawyer filter. I think you've talked about them before on the podcast. Very, very useful device, very lightweight and easy to use. And filtering your water it can keep you from getting sick.
Absolutely, especially out in the bush, as it were, because I mean you're exposed to much more nasty bugs potentially out there because there is no no water treatment and a lot of bears and whatnot that are adding their bugs to the water, if you know what I mean.
Yes, that's true. Though I don't know, I might have to disagree a little. I think the bugs from man are worse potentially for you.
I do not disagree. I stand corrected. That is for sure. Well, Rob, thanks so much for I sit in awe of you, at 49, 50 years old to be able to pick up kind of at this elite level, this bikepacking race stuff and to be able to integrate this into your life and all of the kind of really big deal things that you're tackling within the next year. I think it's fantastic. And I really want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your experiences with us.
Oh, no problem. Thank you, Tim.
A big thank you to Robert for chatting with me. He wanted to add in a subsequent email that new bikepackers should just grab whatever bike they have, whatever gear they have, and just get out there and do an overnight. You don't need to wait around for special gear. That was something that he really wanted to emphasize. And I agree. The same thing is true with kind of the more standard, pannier and road bike touring. Use the bikes, use the gear that you've got, and just give it a shot. You can always upgrade down the line. Wanted to add one more thing, and that is a reminder that in the show notes, pedalshift.net/081, you can read the entire journal that Rob put together, and it is really a fantastic read. Take some time, kick back, enjoy a frosty one with it. I'm really excited to talk more about bikepacking as I learn more about it. As I mentioned in the interview, I'm adding a few things. I've got a small frame bag, and I'm also in contact with some other folks who are planning on coming on the show to talk a little bit more about bikepacking as well. So if you've sort of biding your time for 80 episodes prior to this, now your 81st episode, you finally get some freaking bikepacking talk. We're going to be having some more chatting about that. And I think that there's a space maybe for a merger using some bikepacking principles with standard road touring and having that middle ground and maybe seeing a change in how we pack our gear going forward. Lots of exciting stuff happening in the world of bike touring and new ways of doing it, new ways of approaching it. And as always, we'd like to close out the show with a big thank you to everybody who is a member of the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help keep the show listener supported and expanding the offerings as we go along. It could be a few bucks a month, could be a one-shot support. It's totally up to you. Pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Derek Wagner, Harry Hugel, and new to this episode, Ferguson Meek, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, and a big thank you to all anonymous and past contributors for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net. Lots of great content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through iTunes or your favorite podcast aggregator. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his debut album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Habitat, wherever cool music is available.